first thinking about writing the book 5 to 8 years ago, the world seemed a much safer place. I was complacent, but we were doing pretty well back then. As I began to write the book, things also began to fall apart, not only in the country but in the world. And we have these rising threats to democracy in the United States and many other countries. Frankly, that the baby boom population, which has been running the country for a long time here in the United States, has not performed as well as one might have hoped. There have been many disappointments. Some fine people in the baby boom generation, but they left behind a country that is suffering badly from not just the pandemic, but what's been going on with the economy, with racial inequities, with climate issues, and now the crisis in Ukraine, the growing sense that China is a threat to the United States, which I think we over-exaggerate. But there have been so many things that have left us uncertain about the future. I thought it was important to, first of all, and challenge the younger generations to get into the arena, to join the fight, to stay in the fight, because it's going to be a struggle here in the years to come to right all these wrongs we're in. But it's also true that what I see in the younger generations is real promise. They strike me as people who could have been World War II veterans. They have a sort of a steel in them, and they have an inner discipline, and they care greatly about the country. I wanted to have a voice in trying to encourage more young people, younger generations, to get into the arena and to help us out of this mess. Well, I think that the baby boom generation, if I may say so, did not have as much grit. I count myself as among those responsible for what we've going through, and those who regret where we are. I just didn't find that we hung in there. As Pat Moynihan used to say, we borrowed $1 trillion and had a great party. And yet, what have we gotten for all the efforts of the baby boom population? We're in a situation where the baby boom population is leaving behind a country in real trouble. The World War II generation, by contrast, a generation I greatly respect, a generation who introduced me to Washington and to leadership, that generation left behind an America that was the strongest country since the days of ancient Rome, militarily, economically, culturally. We were in great shape, but we've slipped from that. We ought to recognize it. We ought to call it out for what it is. And we need to prepare the leaders of the future, people who are going to return this country to a better place. I think it's time for the older generation to step aside and pass the baton to the new generation. I'm included among them. I think those of us who are older can still be helpful. We can still support people who are younger. We can still offer counsel if that's requested. We can still do things at the community level. But we need fresh energy in this country. We need fresh leadership. And that is going to come not just at the community level, but has to come at the national level. I think we can do it. I think we're capable of doing that, but we have to get on with it. I think that it's easier to get to the top these days because of social media. Look at AOC, the young woman who came out of nowhere onto the national scene. She was master of the social media. She did handle it very, very well. I have a lot of respect for what she did. I think that shows if you really work at it, you can get to the top very quickly. She became a national figure. The hard thing is to actually exercise power when you get to the top, to actually get things done. That's perilous because we're so divided as a country. And there's so many barriers in the way of progress that it's hard to be a good leader. It's very, very hard. It's easy to become a leader, hard to be a good leader. And by the way, very easy to slip off the pedestal. To one mistake and you can get creamed in this society. You're held up to society as being, this awful person. They take one aspect of your life and dramatize it. People love to tear down. It's almost like playing King of the Mountain. I don't know if you did that when you were a kid. And that's a game you try to get to the top of a mound and you're king of the mountain and then somebody else wants to pull you down and right away. Well, that's sort of how our political and public life is these days. Both things are important. you do need someone who's tough. I found with presidents, for example, if you're in international negotiations with an adversary, you want to be very respectful. You want to make some progress, but you also want that adversary to know that if you don't make progress, if he tries to screw you over in one way or another, you have a club in the closet. Keep that club in the closet. Use it only in the last resort, but you better have a club, because people have a lot more respect for you and will listen to you when you do that. Now, it also happens, and increasingly, that to be effective, you need a strong sense of empathy toward the people you're dealing with. You need to see the world as they see it, what it is like to walk in their moccasins, as so to speak. And that's an important element of leadership today, is to understand the little guy, to understand the women who've been discriminated against, to understand the people of color who've been discriminated against, and to join them in trying to make their lives better. True leaders today have that combination of hard-headedness, but soft heart. One has to start a leadership journey with a better sense of who you are, yourself, with self-understanding. That means you've got to sort of come to grips with not just your strengths, but with your weaknesses, and try to develop the strengths if you can. Now, if the choice you have to make is between becoming a great at something, or having great skill or something like that, versus going from good to great. Let's say you've got a choice. You're starting out at the bottom. You're just getting started on your leadership development. You're not very strong yet. What should you focus on? The skills that you don't have very much on, or things that you actually have some skills and capacity on, to get really good at it? Do you want to go from good to mediocre, or do you want to go from good to great? That's a phrase that Jim Collins developed. Companies don't need you. Teams don't need you if you're simply going to be good. They're looking for people who are extremely bright, extremely talented in a particular way. You have to have particular kind of skills that take a long time to develop. And if you look at the Beatles, when they went off to Germany and used to perform in all sorts of cafes there, it's estimated that before they came back to England, as the stars they came back to be, they had spent about 10,000 hours preparing their capacity, working together, playing together, getting better together. They went from good to great. That's what we mean by having knowledge of yourself, but the second part of that, building on that self-knowledge, is self-mastery. And if you have those two things together, the chances are you'll do very, very well in whatever field you introduce yourself to. What I have found in the younger generations is, as I said, a grit and an idealism that I think is rare. I associate them a lot with the World War II generation, which was the most effective we've had in recent times. And I think there are a lot of people who are young now who remind me of World War II veterans. Especially those people coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq and the U.S. military. They learned discipline. They learned hard discipline. When I've worked with the veterans coming back, and I spent a lot of time trying to help them get elected on both sides of the aisle, I find that they're very appealing people whom I think can change the world. And one of the big issues is there's just not enough of them. One of the reasons that I'll be looking at is to the creation of a new national service program, so that we would encourage every young person between the ages, say, of 18 to 24 to spend at least a year giving back to the community. Working in a soup kitchen, working for a hospital, volunteering time, working in a church or a synagogue, places of worship, but working in places where you can give back to your community is, I think, one of the great avenues forward. Our hopes for rebuilding this country rest very heavily, in my judgment, upon the quality and the idealism and the growth of these younger generations. There are a lot of young people out there who are terrific, but there are not enough. If we have national service, we can have tens of thousands of people, 150, 200,000 young people, to come spend a year helping their communities, helping rebuild America. That would be terrific. And by the way, go to college and then go do this. You got college debts. The idea behind national service is for every year you give to your community, you get 1 year off on your college debt. These debts weigh people down. It's really, if you have a lot of debt, it's really, really hard to be in service to the country. But if you've helped to solve that problem, you can do wonders. I'm encouraged that the business community is stepping up on these issues more than it has. The Business Roundtable, in particular, with Jamie Dimon and others, have really committed themselves to not just to shareholder prosperity, but to stakeholder prosperity. And that is that corporations are trying to serve a bigger community, not just their own profits, but they're trying to help build a bigger community. There's a group now of CEOs, and they've committed themselves to over the next 10 years to create 1 million jobs a year for people of color, for Blacks especially. And that is exactly the kind of help that is going to be so helpful to liberate young people who don't have many chances in life. And we ought to be building up those kinds of things. I love the title, Hearts Touched with Fire. Now, where did that come from? It came from a young man named Oliver Wendell Holmes. Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. His father was a very prominent physician here in the Boston area. This is a family that had access to money. So that as Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. grew up, he was in a very, very strong position socially and economically. And then along came the Civil War. Many rich kids, many people of privilege ducked the Civil War. They paid somebody else to go fight for them. Oliver Wendell Holmes refused to do that. Instead, he volunteered, and off he went to war. And during the Civil War, he was grievously wounded on 3 different occasions, and the last of which he was left for dead on the battlefield. People thought they'd never see him again, including his dad, who came searching for him. And miraculously, he not only lived, but he went on to a very, very active life, did a lot of things for the country. And about 20 years after the Civil War, he gave a speech, which was long remembered thereafter. He gave a speech to an audience about what it was like to be fighting on the Union side and fighting in the war in his generation. And Holmes, in his speech, argued, look, every young person should share in the passions of their generation, to be there for it, for the big fights, for the big things that are going on. And Holmes went on to say, our generation, my generation, were blessed. We had hearts touched with fire. That's the way a young person should look at service to the country. I love that quote, and that's the title of the book. It also has a message.